And I guess the goal is for this, honestly, is for us to get to know every one of you and for you guys to leave here feeling inspired and just feeling like you have done something and that you can do something to help outside of social media, because hashtag and turning your profiles blue, like that's great for awareness, but if it stops there, it really is, it's detrimental. It makes things even worse, because then it's this facade that I've helped, I've done something, and it's going to be okay. It's not, so we need to follow through, which is why we have laptops in the back where people can be, using ResistBot to literally email your legislators and your representatives. So make sure you do that.
But before we start, I just wanted to add a little something. I think a lot of you are here because you are interested in Sudan, because you have the heart to be interested in some place outside of your country, some people outside of yourselves, right? But I think one of the main things to remember is that in global politics, everything is connected. And so by being here, you're not only holding the government of Sudan accountable for what it's doing to the people, you're also holding the US government accountable for what it's doing, right? Because as much as we like to think that we are land of the free, home of the brave, right, land of democracy, a lot of stuff that we are implicated in, whether directly or indirectly to our knowledge or not, is not so much upholding the values that we believe in as Americans. So you being here is also you holding your government accountable, which you should do.
Yeah, so I guess before I begin speaking, I just want to say that, I am, whatever I say today, whatever any of us say today is not a representation of the entire Sudanese population and their thoughts and feelings on things. Sudan is an incredibly diverse country. And, in a room like this, perhaps there could the representation of Sudan might skew a certain demographic. But believe me when I say Sudan is super diverse, and we have people from all kinds of backgrounds, and so just take that into account, and I'll make sure to make it clear what my experiences are and what my thoughts are and how they're more indicative to me and my experience. And so anyway, so Omar Bashir, this is someone that has been up until very recently the head of Sudan my entire life. He came to power in 1989 through a military coup. He was a military man through and through, trained through the military academy, went up the ranks of the Sudanese military, and then 89 overthrew the government. And I was born in 91, so Omar Bashir is all I've known. He led the country with an iron fist. He's somebody that was very repressive and oppressive towards all kinds of Sudanese groups that didn't really match what he perhaps saw as the ideal Sudanese person. He's someone from the north, and people that really benefited the most from Omar Bashir's reign are people who lived in places like Khartoum and Omdurman, and people who looked like him and practiced Islam the way that he did. Throughout his time, people living in regions of Sudan like Darfur, South Kordofan, Blue Nile, people have been oppressed through his military and through, the Janjaweed, which is a paramilitary group that we'll be talking about multiple times throughout tonight's session. The media has been censored throughout his entire regime. You can't really go and open up a Sudanese newspaper and just see open critique of Omar Bashir up until, again, very recently. Truly an oppressive head of state, and him finally getting overthrown back in April was a really surreal moment. And I think that what really took for something like that to happen was for the upper and middle class in Khartoum to finally join in on the anti-Bashir movement in a really real way, because there have been protests against Omar Bashir and insurgencies against his military and his army and his power for a long time in various regions. But the moment it hit the major cities like Khartoum and Omdurman, that was the push that we needed. And Bashir is finally not in power.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Malik. Yeah, and anybody could feel free to chime in after I'm done making this point regarding the economy, because I think in order for other parts of the Sudanese class, for them to start joining in the anti-Bashir protests and really get involved, was for their pockets to be hurt. And Sudan's economy, while it had its issues, that doesn't look like it's working. Yeah, it's a tease, right? Really, Sudanese economy for the longest while was propped off. It was really propped up on oil revenue. Sudan had tremendous oil resources, most of them found in the south of the country. And it was pretty much the biggest source of revenue for the country by a substantial margin. We're talking about 80-90% of the country's revenue was coming through oil, in an industry that was helped put together by lots of outside countries, particularly China, played a big role in the development of the oil industry there. And that really helped Sudan survive in a post-U.S. sanctions world, which happened around 98, 99, when Sudan was put on U.S. sanctions list as a sponsor of terrorism, and various human rights abuses around the country. And oil really played a big part in helping sustain the economy and see it grow throughout the 2000s. When I was there, I lived in Sudan from 98, 2001, and then 04 to 2010. And in my perspective, limited to Khartoum, the capital, I saw Sudan grow and continue to develop every passing year. Lots of infrastructure developments, everything was good. What really changed it was what happened in 2011 when South Sudan split and became its own country, an independent country, after years of violence and conflict with the north of Sudan, fueled by various factors that maybe other people could speak about a little better to here. But when South Sudan became its own country, it took with it 75% of the country's oil resources. They had been located mainly in the south the entire time. So when it became its own country, it got split and went towards South Sudan. So the north had to then enter a revenue sharing agreement with the south on oil revenues, which severely impacted the country's ability to generate the revenue that it used to have. And because of that, the economy pretty much just never recovered. Every passing year, it just got worse and worse and worse because you had a country that didn't know how to diversify. We had leaders that didn't know how to diversify the economy. Most of it was pretty much predominantly based on oil. So that played a big role in the economy tanking, and thus the quality of life for a lot of middle and upper class people in the country, particularly in the north, the capital, tanking throughout the years.
Yeah, I just want to build off of what Muhammad and Malik were saying. Al-Bashir's whole drive behind dividing the country in terms of tribal lines or on religious lines had nothing to do with neither tribe nor religion, and was more about resources. The South, particularly, as they said, is very rich in resources, in oil, which is like the bulk of the country's revenue. So, fueling people's hatred of Southern Sudanese or South Sudanese by saying that they are unlike us, playing up the Northern Arab identity, which now became our stamp. Every time somebody talks about Sudan, it's the Arab North versus the African South, or the Arab Muslim North versus the Christian African South, when we are all African. And there are Christians who live in the north, and there are Muslims who live in the south. But that didn't fall into his narrative, right? So that's so use that same thing to be applied to Blue Nile and the Nuba Mountains, Darfur. All of these conflicts were based on nothing, and so by the time Sudanese people got together for the last time in December 2018 and began to protest seriously against Bashir, and like Malik said, it took upper middle class people and middle class people being hit by the economic crisis, which is not a crisis. The economy has crashed. There's nothing. There's a cash flow problem. There's a bread and fuel crisis, which is probably how you heard the revolution framed, right? This is a bread revolution, which it is. However, there are all these other factors that play into it that were not mentioned by the media and that nobody knows except the people who are living it, right? And so by April, when al-Bashir was ousted, it was bittersweet for us because it was like, oh my God, this dude has been in power my entire life. But now he's replaced with another military dictator known as the Transitional Military Council, right? This is our second key player, right? These are the people who supposedly deposed him and took over in his place and promised the people that they would hand over the power to a civilian government, which is what we wanted all along. But now it's 2 months in since he's been deposed and nothing. They're still here. They're still stalling. They still don't want to go nowhere. And now their narrative is, we know best. The military knows best, which is what Bashir told us for 30 years, right? So it's kind of still more of the same. These are all men who, were his generals, upper echelon leadership in the military. They were his advisors for the most part. These are all men who are very close to Bashir. So as far as we're concerned, it's the same thing, right? Nothing has changed. Bashir is still in power. He's just not sitting on the throne, right? But then, so now those are all the bad guys. Shall we talk about the good guys? The good guys are us, the Sudanese people who, since December of 2018, have been out in the streets facing bullets, facing tear gas, facing arrest, facing beatings, facing house raids, all of that, right? For 3 things: freedom, peace, and justice. That's what makes me mad about the whole, this is a bread revolution, this is a bread crisis. Trevor Noah on The Daily Show said, it took bread. It took bread to get Sudanese people out into the streets. No, it didn't. Bread was the spark, but it took 30 years of oppression. It took a lot more than that, right? We've withstood a lot more than just a bread crisis. And when people went out in the streets since day one on December 13th, 2018, they didn't go out asking for bread. They went out asking for it to fall. They wanted the regime to fall. They didn't want bread. They didn't want money. They didn't want oil. They didn't want gas. They wanted them gone. And that has been the chant from day one till now, 6 months later, right? Freedom, peace, and justice. Those are the 3 tenets of this revolution. If you don't take anything else from what we're talking about today, take those 3. That's what the Sudanese people want: freedom, peace, and justice. So I guess we can go straight into.
No, you covered the first 2 points of the timeline. So.
Oh, all right. Well.
Yeah. I think I just want to build a little bit on that in terms of what the 3 of you just said in talking a little bit about the history of Sudan. Literally, that since Sudan gained its independence from the British in 1956, before it was even officially independent in 1955, there was already a lot of resistance that was growing in the south because of racist policies. That's kind of the short version of saying that there was a lot of superiority complex narratives that were very
instilled by colonialism.
Instilled by colonialism and carried out and continued, favoring resources, favoring power by the North. And so this isn't something new. This is something that has been embedded because of the colonial legacy and the colonial history. But in 1989, when this regime came to power for the first time, it became state sanctioned. That was a state narrative. Before that, everybody knew that this is what's up, but now it's you have the official state policy condoning this story and this narrative.
Right, and I mean it goes so far as on your birth certificate or on your your state IDs or whatever, any government form that you fill out, they ask you what your tribe is, right? And my mother went to renew her passport, and the man asked her, "You didn't fill out tribe. What's your tribe?" And she said, "Sudanese." And he threw the papers in her face. He told her to get out. He would not renew her passport because she wouldn't give him a tribe because she didn't believe in that, right? So that's how deeply embedded in the system it was. Right. Yeah. So when people came out in December 2018, yeah, they came out because of bread, but they also came out because they were tired of everything else, right? Tribalist policies. They were tired of economic and political policies, social policies that were put in place to keep people down and to benefit those in power and only those in power. And sorry. Now I just want to say, we talked about the oil revenue, right? And that 75% of the oil revenue went to the South. But we didn't talk about before that, when we had 100% of the oil revenue and none of the benefit, right? Sudan is still a third world country, even though it had billions of dollars coming in from the oil business. And
directly into people's pockets.
Right.
Corruption has just been like through the roof. Absurd.
Yeah,
Absurd.
just most of our money goes towards our military. So despite like having billions, like I think it's an outrageous number. It's only 70% of our revenues goes towards our military.
80% in 2018.
It's even worse.
Yeah.
And what's important to mention is that, like, while great idea, way more sense. But yeah, just want to quickly add it on. Yes, so 80% went towards the military, and then what's really important to keep in mind is that even when we lost the majority of those oil revenues, 80% of our revenue still went towards the military. That never changed. So the government kept on ensuring that they continued to invest into the portions of the country that allow them to keep their power throughout Sudan. Investing to the military and ensuring that statewide violence continued to happen was their way of maintaining control.
What I just want to mention that what Athena is saying is it's not like a one-off thing. Any Sudanese person you talk to will have at least one, if not a handful, of these kinds of experiences, these kinds of direct stories, either themselves or their family members, their run-ins with security forces, their run-ins with police, their run-ins with how the state has tried to crush or oppress them personally, not just on a like societal level, right? So this is kind of the environment that we are dealing with in December 2018 when people decide to protest. They're oppressed socially, politically, they are oppressed economically, right? They're going through an economic collapse. Nobody can access their money even if they have it. People cannot buy bread. And so they take to the streets. And in the beginning, the government, so this is all organized by this force that makes itself known at I think by mid-December as the Sudanese Professionals Association, which is like a group of organizations, professional organizations. Here we would call them unions, but in Sudan, having a union is illegal, so they are professional organizations that banded together and decided to spearhead this movement. And they did so by organizing it through the internet, right? We are in a digital age, and so they use the internet, social media, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter to organize, to mobilize, to coordinate, and build on the movement that sparked naturally in Adbara on December 19th, right? Actually, even before that, but for all intents and purposes, Adbara on December 19th. And the government in the beginning made fun of it. They called it the WhatsApp revolution. How can a revolution succeed over the internet? Y'all must be crazy, right? These are just some kids. They have nothing better to do with their time. They're bored. Being professionals means that you have money, so therefore this is frivolous of you to be out in the streets demanding freedom, peace, and justice, right? And so, but as the crowds grew and as every protest became more powerful and more ginormous, for lack of a better word, than the next, so did the state's response, right? Became more violent. First it was tear gas, then it was tear gas and beatings, then it was tear gas and bullets, then it was tear gas and snipers, then it was arrests, then it was house raids, then it was detention for long periods of time and torture. All of these things, and that none of that stopped the Sudanese people, right? By Christmas, there was, I think, at least 12 people shot from December 19th to Christmas, right? Already you have 12 people dead, if not more. And just an amount of terror that we in Khartoum had never seen. Because up until this point, there's this kind of violence all over the country. In Darfur, in the south, in the Nuba Mountains. But in Khartoum, where everything is centralized and where the government lives and operates, people are comparatively safe, right? And so now we started to see how the government operates where it isn't seen, right? Where there aren't eyes watching, where there isn't an international community presence. And so, but none of that stopped us. I'm gonna just go ahead and fast forward. State of emergency didn't stop us. That Bashir announced in February, that along with it was a curfew, was random house raids that the security forces could do. They could take your money if you had dollars. They could confiscate your, foreign currency. They could jail you for just having foreign currency. All of these things didn't stop the Sudanese people until April 6th. April 6th is a really important date for us because April 6, 1985 was the day we ousted Nimeri, also through a peaceful revolution. No bullets, no fighting, nothing. Peaceful people going out in the street and expressing their dissent toppled a military dictator of 16 years in 1985. So on April 6, 2019, the Sudanese people came out and met up in Khartoum and in other cities in front of the military headquarters of their city and formed sit-ins. And you've probably seen, and we'll show you photos and video from that historic moment, right? All the way up until April 11th when he was deposed. And that was, like I said, very bittersweet for us because a military dictator was ousted, killing the oldest dictatorship in Africa. Yeah, the oldest dictatorship in Africa. But replaced by another military man, who was replaced by another military man a day later, and formed what we now know as the Transitional Military Council, made up of Abdel Fattah Burhan.
And then Hemeti, we want to make sure we talk about him.
Abdel Fattah Burhan is a general who's the head of the Transitional Military Council. He replaced the man before him because he was supposedly a man who was respected by the military, right? And so they knew that the military would fall in line if they had somebody at the head of the country who they respected. They also gave us a lot of facts about Burhan, very upstanding guy, no political affiliation, even though the Sudanese military is deeply politicized, so that's bullshit. But whatever. They tell us he's apolitical. He doesn't have any political leanings. He's a military man through and through. He was called the God of Darfur because the people of Darfur loved him so much. The next day, the people of Darfur write all over social media. He was called the God of Darfur because of the horrific acts that his troops committed in Darfur, because of the murder that he committed in Darfur. The next day after Burhan takes power, he enlists Hemeti, otherwise known, his government name is Muhammad Hamdan Dagalo, right? But he's known as Hemeti. Hemeti is the man who orchestrated the Darfur genocide. Him and his Janjaweed in 2003 were recruited by the government and given arms and given money to suppress the rebels in Darfur, who were rebelling for the same reasons we're rebelling right now: freedom, peace, and justice, right? And they sent Hemeti out with his Janjaweed, who are made up of child soldiers, by the way, that he trains, that he drugs, or that they train and they drug. The EU loves to use to curtail, human trafficking and to mitigate migration, right? So Hemeti becomes the deputy head of the Transitional Military Council, from a warlord to a nation's leader. And now, effectively, he is the leader of the country because Burhan is. And the Sudanese people still won't back down. The sit-ins have thousands of people coming on a daily basis. People are staying the night. They're drawing art all over the walls. They're singing. They're chanting. Ramadan comes around. Everybody's fasting. People fast through the heat, right? 110-degree weather. People are still fasting. People are still chanting. People are still protesting. Every day there's group after group of protesters. They're not only just coming in from different parts of Khartoum, they're coming in from different parts of the country. There's a whole train that came from Adbara all the way to Khartoum, packed like people were on top of the train. Yeah, hanging off the sides of the train, coming to join the Khartoum sit-in so they could participate in this historic moment of freedom. The Khartoum sit-in wasn't just about protesting. It was about raising awareness. For the first time, people from the center of Sudan, people from Khartoum and more privileged areas got to meet face to face with people from Darfur, with people from the south, with people from the Nuba Mountains, and hear about their struggle. Because all we heard was the people in Darfur are trying to sabotage the country. That's why we're bombing them. That's why we're killing them. And for the first time, we heard people's experiences firsthand as they experienced them, right? We heard from people about their struggles that we weren't able to see in Khartoum, and we're not able to see out here, right? It was about an exchange of information. It was about collective awareness. People were becoming more politically aware, because what's political education? What's political awareness in a police state? That doesn't exist. And so now you had actual awareness sessions. People would sit down, they would explain to you, what is a civilian government? What is a protest? What is a civil disobedience? What are we doing here now? All of these things to elevate the collective awareness of the Sudanese people. And this wasn't just happening in Khartoum, it was happening in sit-ins all over the country. And that was what really drove them insane. Because no matter what happened, what massacre happened, what Ramadan rolled around, they were still killing people, still arresting people, still beating people. People would not leave, right? Ramadan came around, they said Ramadan is going to kill them all. They're either going to die of heat and thirst and hunger, or they're going to go home because they can't take it anymore. People stayed all through Ramadan. And instead of celebrating our victory of being at the sit-in for 2 months, on the eve of Eid, which is the end of Ramadan, and one of the most joyous days for Muslims, right? Which Sudan is a predominantly Muslim country, but one of the most joyous days for the people who are fasting. This is the end of your fast. You've made it through 30 days of Ramadan. On that morning, RSF, Rapid Support Forces, which we will call the Janjaweed from now on, and you should too, because there's no such thing as the Rapid Support Forces. The Janjaweed, along with riot police and security forces, attacked the Khartoum sit-in, and you've probably heard of this. Murdered at 5 o'clock in the morning, they started shooting and beating people. Shooting, beating, raping people in the street. By the time maybe 6 o'clock rolled around, they had driven through the sit-in, which previously you could not drive through. You couldn't drive through it because there were barricades all around the sit-in area that the protesters, or I should say the citizens, had built themselves. And there were guards, citizen guards, at these barricades that searched everybody who came in to make sure that everybody inside the sit-in was safe. You couldn't drive into the sit-in unless you were an ambulance and somebody was sick. And that morning, Janjaweed drove through in convoys through the sit-in and set the tents where people were asleep on fire, killing the people inside, raping the women who were trying to run for cover, and beating and shooting anybody who was trying to leave the city. Then some of the people that they killed, they threw in the Nile, just to make sure that, and some of them were alive when they were thrown in. We saw testimony later on from one guy I read personally who said, they threw me in the Nile. It's a good thing I knew how to swim. The other people with me didn't. I'm not telling you this because I want it to be a sob story. I'm telling you this to give you the background for what happened next. All that massacre that we watched, because at this point, the internet had not been shut down yet. It was shut down shortly after. We watched all of this live, right? And I sat in my room crying and completely dejected until I saw the next live. And it was the people who had left the sit-in and were now barricading the roads in the neighborhoods around the sit-in area and protesting and saying, we're not going home. You kicked us out, you killed us, you shot at us, we're not going home. Right? And they continued their violent rampage in order to break people's spirits, and it did not work. And to this day, people are still protesting on a daily basis, even though whatever we saw from security forces before, nothing was like what happened on June 3rd in Khartoum. Khartoum had never seen violence like that before. We were protected, we were sheltered. This was the violence that people in Darfur faced on a daily basis for over a decade, that people in the Nuba Mountains have been facing, that people in the South faced for 25 years. And we were just getting to know it. But that's it. But people's silence has been broken. That's it. Once you reach a certain point, you can't stop after that. And so they kept going. There were mass arrests after June 3rd. On June 10th, they burned a town in Darfur just to let us know, hey, we can still do this. What you gonna do about this? Because people in Khartoum had been chanting, we are all Darfur, which never happened before. People in Khartoum didn't even know that there was a genocide in Darfur. When we were talking about it here in the U.S. in 2012 and George Clooney was out there, doing his thing, people in Khartoum were like, what genocide? What's this man talking about? No, this is Western powers trying to make us look bad.
Right.
And then June 3rd, 2019 happened. And everybody got a rude awakening. Oh shit, yeah, that does happen. That did happen. But like I said, we've reached a point of no return. And so, it is now, so on June 3rd, maybe say midday June 3rd, the internet was shut down. The internet has been shut down ever since. At first, it was a temporary measure according to the Transitional Military Council. Now they've decided, no, we're going to keep it shut down for 3 months because, quote, social media is a threat to national security. That's a direct quote. So 3 months of no internet with the possibility of an extension, obviously, which means that your main tool for organization is now dead, right? You can't organize, you can't mobilize in the grand scale that you could before because you just can't reach people anymore, right? Then you have leadership that's being targeted. People are in hiding because they're being, they're looking for you. They're looking for you. But that's not stopping them. Now, instead of using WhatsApp and Facebook and Twitter to spread the word, now it's SMS. We're sending text messages to each other. People outside of Sudan are sending text messages to people inside Sudan to let them know. We're sending SIM cards to Sudan so people can communicate using roaming internet instead of using their local SIM card. Anything and everything we can do to keep this movement going. And that's why we're doing this event today. This is part of our contribution to keep the movement going.
This is why we flew you from Phoenix, Arizona. Please give it up for Saturday.
I guess I have been sitting with the sentiment of feeling so honored and inspired to be Sudanese, feeling so just grateful to be witnessing this revolution, even if I wasn't a Sudanese person. I have never personally experienced an energy like the energy of the Sudanese revolution. The sit-in that Sada talked about, people staying up all night and drawing and painting and chanting and music and art, and it was just this moment that, given the background of what we've been talking about Sudan and social oppression and political oppression and economic oppression, was a almost utopic space that came into being. Right, and exactly, we were talking about that, it's so hard to, I think you said this, it's so hard to understand the value and the depth of having a nonviolent revolution in the face of so much violence. That it is continuously, not one person, what the Janjaweed did at some point after June 3rd? They started going into neighborhoods and leaving arms intentionally, so that
planting guns on the floor,
planting guns, raping women, going into people's homes. You are not safe anywhere, and they would leave guns so that people can take up arms. So that, of course, that can excuse whatever. However, they can then respond even more violently, and nobody did anything. Nobody took up any arms. It has been a 100% peaceful revolution. That is, I don't even know what to say about that. I don't even know what to say about that. It's absolutely incredible. And so, yeah, I think for me, I will briefly talk about this because I know we don't want to talk too much, but I was in Sudan in December of 2018 when the protests erupted. I did not go to any of the protests, and I actually was feeling so many feelings around it at the time. And I remember spending New Year's Eve writing about all of them and being why is it that I have gone to so many Black Lives Matters protests in the States, or just have been to other kinds of organized political action, but when I'm in my own country, I'm not showing up. I'm not showing up like that.
And we were there in December too, and we didn't go either.
Right. And to me, I was just really deeply thinking about it, and I was it's because I don't think there's a point. I was just what is the point? Of course, I'm not naive. I know.
Yeah, but we've been told that Bashir's going to be.
It's just, I was what is even the thing? What is even the, I'm not, I was going to say, I'm not under the impression that America's in any kind of true democratic state in any way of representation, but it's still, there is the national narrative, and there's the context, there's the national imaginary of freedom, as a national value, whatever that means, is something at least to aspire towards, work with, whatever complexity it is. I was like, what do we, in Sudan, like, what is that? Like, do we have that? Like, what is even I had no idea, you know? And I was talking to so many people, like, I'll talk to, like, my cab driver, or I'll talk to, like, whoever about, like, are you going? Did you go? What was it like? Like, tell me about it. And some people were, like, you know, on the same boat a little bit, but so many people were, like, you know, it's a slow death anyway. You might as well just go. Like, we're dying anyway. And so, yeah, so I was in that complete, like, blase, like, there's just, I wish I could be inspired to go, but it's completely pointless. They're just going to shoot everybody at some point. So then I was in LA, I worked not too far from here, on April 6th when Ahmed Bashir's regime fell. And I was just looking at all of these videos on Instagram and literally, like, I can't. I have to just be in Sudan. Like, I really need to go, like, right now. This is amazing. And I went in April, and it was just like, I mean, just a few things about the Sudan. There's hundreds of thousands of people on the street, right? There's, like, someone over there that's, like, charger man. If your phone dies, you go to them. You can plug your phone and get, you know, whatever. Everybody will make sure before you leave, they're like, do you have enough money to get home? Do you need a ride? Like, people would literally leave baskets on the floor of money. Like, if you need some, take some. Like, it was just...
That was a literal song. You need some, take some. You don't, put some.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like, actually. So it was, to me, I'm like, yes, you can squash that physical space, but what was created, not only is it like, let's imagine a new Sudan, it's literally like we lived it. Like, we have performed it. We have that reference point now, you know, and nothing can take that away. And, like, it's gonna come back.
نشتري المجد بأغلى ثمن هذه الأرض لنا فليعش سوداننا علما بين الأمم يا بني السودان هذا رمزكم يحمل العبء ويحمي أرضكم.
اندمجت جموع الناس في موكب التشييع وبدأت تردد هتافات مطالبة بالانتقام ثم رحيل النظام. كانت قد بدأت ثورة.
بشعبها صح؟ عندنا قبضوهم من فلسطين طبعا. شوفها شوفها أنا بحب أفكر يا أخي
وموت اولادنا وموت بناتنا وكل اللي حصل لنا دي يجي عشان تتفرض على السلطه. ده اللي احنا قاعدين له هنا. انتوا يا قوى اعلان الحريه والتغيير بتمثلوا لساننا نحن نتكلم به، لساننا فقط لا غير. تمشوا هناك يقولوا كلامنا مكتوب في اعلان الحريه، اعلان الحريه. نحن القوى الجماهيريه وصدق الرئيس ما بيجيبوا يسقط معارضته. سقطتم كلكم لحد ما يجي اللي يخش جوا ويقول الكلام اللي احنا بنقوله.
الله اكبر الله اكبر. لفظ اعتصام بالقوة ما تجي العين. لا اله الا الله محمد رسول الله. يا سعادتك معقول اجينا سعادتك يا اخي انت جيش يا اخي انت جيش يا اخي تدخل علينا بابنا تدخل علينا باب انت يا اخي. حرام عليكم حرام عليكم يا حرام عليكم انتم في الناس يا اخي ولا انتم في الناس يا اخي انتم في الناس يا اخي يا كلاب يا مرتضى لا لا يا مثلا في واحد قدامي انا سنه كده انت جنبي وصوروا انا كيف انت ما راجل مرجع والله بطل. مضروب رافع يدينه على النص. ده مصاب الآن ده مصاب الآن ده المصابين المصابين كلهم فينا لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. لا قراءهم قطعت لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله.
They made them lie on the road and they beat them up.
You saw this?
Yes, I saw this. And then I stopped looking at the window. I feel guilty actually because I'm safe.
شهيد بركة فيك. ايوه الحمد لله الحمد لله الحمد لله الحمد لله شهادك. انظر كل اولادك يا حاج. انظر كل اولادك.
17 يونيو الصحافة مواكبة الليلية تسقط التالي.
على أجنحة البدر ترفرف فوق علامات. على أجنحة البدر ترفرف فوق علامات. من بيناتك بامك تطلع شمس عظاتك. من بيناتك بامك تطلع شمس عظاتك. يا شعب اللحبت توريتك. يا شعب اللحبت توريتك. انت تلقى براتك في بيتك.
So I think we just want to take a moment, have hold a moment of silence for those of us their lives. Okay, thank you.
So this is something that we didn't touch on, but I think is really important. Actually, something maybe we mentioned in the beginning, before we started. This involvement of other governments, right? Foreign governments' involvement in what's going on in Sudan right now. Because yes, Bashir's regime was terrible, and he was up in power for 30 years and oppressed the people of Sudan in every way, shape, or form. But he also found support from people, other governments that benefited from him being in power. Governments like the UAE and Saudi Arabian government, both of them have, for one, lots of investments in Sudan. Saudi Arabia has leased, I think in 2017 or 2018, made a deal with the Sudanese government to lease incredible amounts of agricultural land in northern Sudan for the next 99 years, right? I'm sure to a great profit to whoever made that deal, but the Sudanese people are not seeing any of that money. Neither are they seeing the fruit of the agricultural land that is being leased. But possibly the biggest benefit for the UAE and Saudi Arabia is through the war in Yemen, which they are both fighting with using Sudanese troops, and specifically using Janjaweed troops that Hemeti ships over, child soldiers that go to Yemen and fight the war in Yemen for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. to the detriment of the Sudanese people. You also have the EU that benefits, like I said before, from the rapid support forces as quote unquote border control to keep migrants from East Africa from moving up north or through Libya or into the Mediterranean and into Europe. And they frame that as migration control and actually human trafficking control, but really it's just they're trying to keep people out of Europe, right? And the proof of it is that now they have stopped funding the Khartoum process, which is the project that deals with that and deals primarily with the RSF to make that happen. The U.S. has long been in a sort of cooperation deal with Sudan in efforts for counterterrorism. This was a way for the Sudanese government to show that it has changed from its label as axis of evil, as a state that sponsors terrorism. Now we do counterterrorism efforts, which means basically we hand over people, I guess. But also we don't know what it means, right? We just know that Salah Ghosh, who used to be the head of the security forces, which is the main tool for oppression by the state, this was their the arm with which they beat us down. And Salah Ghosh is a CIA informant for all intents and purposes. He is very close with the CIA, and this is known, and there are articles on it, and we will be happy to share them. But basically, at one point in time, he was supposed to be the man who was gonna come up after Bashir. When Bashir was deposed on April 11th, Salah Ghosh was being positioned as the man. Actually, since December, he'd been positioned as the man who was going to take his place, and he started to distance himself from him and present himself as a fair party. Oh yes, the government has made mistakes, and we're going to work on that. And yeah, they've made a lot of mistakes, right? He started to distance himself, and now instead of being in custody like other government officials, which is also a sham, but whatever. Instead of being in custody like other government officials, Salah Ghosh was given retirement, and nobody knows where he is now. And he's supposedly under U.S. protection. That's what a lot of us are guessing. So this is how these main players in the world are involved in our rinky-dink little revolution.
And just the war in Yemen is a proxy war essentially between Saudi, UAE, and Iran that they're fighting in Yemen, which the U.S. is definitely siding, obviously, with their very close allies, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, against Iran in that proxy war. Very direct involvement.
And I think another important point is that the UAE and Saudi give the Janjaweed and the Sudanese military, they give them weapons, they give them money to help them with their military operations in the country. And so, Saudi and the UAE are pretty much propping this military state in Sudan. Just giving them more money to engage in their oppression. And the United States gives weapons to Saudi. I think they give weapons to United Arab Emirates. So when you think about UAE and Saudi and how they influence Sudan, you also have to think about how the United States supports the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And there was a really great video I saw of Ilhan Omar in Congress talking to someone in the U.S. military, someone in U.S. security, and asking them how can we make sure that weapons that we give to these countries aren't then later used in Sudan to kill Sudanese protesters. So Ilhan Omar of Minnesota was asking some really, really great questions.
And to add to this international involvement thing, UAE and Saudi Arabia, besides having business interests in Sudan that they want to continue, to see prosper, they also have no interest in seeing democracy in Sudan. It's absolutely not in their interest to see that. You get Sudan if Sunnis protesters and people are victorious in the struggle, which God willing they will be. If this happens, it's going to be disastrous for lots of these authoritarian regimes throughout the region. Egypt, right? Absolutely, Egypt's an excellent example, and it's It's the type of example that Sudan's trying to avoid becoming, because that was a country that went through a tremendous revolution that eventually just saw another military man eventually taking over. And Sudanese people want to avoid that. We want to have a civilian-led government. Countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia do not want to see that, because the moment that happens, it starts giving other people around the region the idea that, hey, the Sudanese people, they did it. Look, look what they're going through right now. Why can't we do the same thing? So, you put that thought into their head, then you're going to get lots of these governments scared. So they're doing what they can to ensure that civilian-led governments can't rise.
So awareness and educating people can only go so far. Action is what's really needed. And, the Sudan conflict or crisis is so complex. But you can't worry about if you turn the lights off or on if the house is burning. What can we do here to take actual action on a humanitarian base first to stop some of these killings, to support financially, what tangible things can we do to help people now? All the political stuff, put it aside, but on a humanitarian level, what can we do now? What resources do we have at our disposal?
And to add on to that, are there good guys that we should be supporting, things that we should know that will actually help us be able to make some type of impact?
Good question. So I'd be interested to see what other people have to say here. I know a lot of people have reached out to me about wanting to support humanitarian groups in Sudan, who are directly connected to the Sudanese people who are suffering from the current military regime. And it's been tough trying to do that. I think the message I heard is that the Sudanese government is keeping a close watch on these local NGOs and the money they're receiving, and they're doing what they can to kind of ensure that local NGOs in Sudan aren't really in any capacity to do anything of support. I think I've been told personally, because I wondered the same thing, right? On a humanitarian level, what can you do? And there's various things you could do. It's really hard to quantify just how impactful, some of these things are. So it's something that I'm still trying to really figure out, I think what people have been doing mainly have been donating towards charities and fundraisers. There's been a GoFundMe that's raised over $350,000 over the last month or so, which has been it's a lot of money. And from my understanding, it's going into the right hands in terms of making sure that people benefit from that. I think there are also some U.S.-based NGOs that have been doing work in Sudan for a long time that are probably better positioned than a lot of people to help people there, including Save the Children. Off the top of my head, that's one I could think of. But yeah, I'd love to know other people on the panel, what's their take on it.
Mohammed makes a good point. The problem with Sudan is that the organizations that work in Sudan are either large organizations, UNICEF, any sort of UN, UN body that really you can't get involved in as an individual. Like, you can't send money to, even if you send your money to UNICEF, donate your money to UNICEF, for example, you don't guarantee that your money is going to go straight to Sudan, right? And then you have the local NGO problem, which is that the government is keeping tabs on them. Money cannot come in to the country, right, because of sanctions, because of a lot of other things, right? So that's also an issue. So there are these fundraisers that have been set up. Right now, I can think of 3 that are vetted and verified, and this is the way that money has been coming into the country to help the protest, to help the revolution. There's a fundraiser organized by the graduates of University of Khartoum in the United States. They've been raising money since December. Their money comes into Sudan. It's guaranteed that it comes into Sudan, and it's guaranteed that the money is used towards supporting the protesters, towards supporting the injured in the protest, and towards supporting the families of those who lost their lives during the last 6 months. There's also an organization in the UK, Sudanese Doctors Union in the UK, that has a fundraiser that their money goes towards medical supplies and treating injured protesters and supporting medical staff in their work in that part. There's also a third fundraiser that is through PayPal, and that one is going specifically towards supporting the civil disobedience. We didn't really talk about the civil disobedience much, but basically what it is that a complete shutdown of the country, right? Nobody goes to work, nobody does anything, no business is conducted, nothing. You don't go buy anything at a store, there's nothing to cripple the country and bring it to a halt, right? The first civil disobedience was in late May. The second one was in response to the June 3rd massacre, and that one lasted for 3 days because the leaders of the revolution realized that because it was so short notice, they weren't prepared. And there were a lot of people who live day to day. There are a lot of people who live, who work informal jobs and live, depend on their daily, whatever income they get daily. And so if you don't create a support system for that, then those people are going to break the civil disobedience regardless of whether they agree with it or not, just out of necessity. And so this third fundraiser through PayPal is done in order to support not only the underprivileged and disadvantaged families in Khartoum, but also across the country to make sure that the next round of civil disobedience is way more sustainable. So those are the three that I know, and I mean 2 of those people I know personally who are running them. And the third, Dr. Bakri Ali's, is a Facebook fundraiser, the one I talked about, the University of Khartoum one. That one has been going on literally since December 18th. So, those are the places that you can donate, that your money is going to go straight to Sudan. Your money is going to go straight towards supporting the revolution, towards supporting the people's goal. Other international organizations I can't speak for. Other Instagram fundraisers, Sudan Meal Project, whatever else you might have seen. Yeah, all of those things I can't speak for.
I have a comment in response to that, which is that I definitely, action is so needed, but definitely want to offer that awareness is also doing in a very, very real way. Sarah mentioned that the EU has stopped funding to the Khartoum project. The Khartoum project is the initiative through which the EU was giving money to what ended up in the hands of the Janjaweed to patrol the borders around Sudan. The EU has literally stopped funding to them after this got so much international awareness, and so many people were posting about it, so many people were changing their profile colors to blue, etc., etc. We can talk about the ways in which these things can be surfaced. However, the Sudanese government definitely, and also its allies, whether Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the EU, indirectly or directly, etc., I guarantee they did not think the world was going to care this much about Sudan. I didn't think the world cared this much about Sudan. Let me be real. And the fact that this is getting so much traction has made very tangible effects. Both the government shutting down the internet as a way to control the image of what people are seeing. It's because this is effective. It's because this is actually making a difference, and because there's still some pretense of diplomacy that needs to be upheld in some ways. So there's a lot of ways in which actually being involved in terms of awareness and sharing and posting and whatever is extremely, extremely effective. However, and I always used to be like, my friend in my head, Sarah Hassan, but now we're actually friends, yay! But she always says that what do you say? Awareness without understanding can be dangerous, and that's what it is. It's like if you want to have a long-term investment in something or a long-term relationship with an issue, actually understanding the nuances, and you just took 3 hours of your day to do that. We took however many hours to prepare that. It's actual labor and it's work, and it is doing something. So I just want to put that.
Let's do one more question, and then don't worry, Saturday will still be here. We'll all be here to answer questions, but we're just going to do one more formal question. I think you had your hand up for a while.
So the question was about the internet blackout, right? What other ways are people doing to raise awareness about what's going on in Sudan with the internet blackout happening, right? How are people going around it, right? How are people working around it? So here's the thing. The bulk of Sudanese people who have access to internet have access to it through their phones, right? Through their cell phone provider. So what the government did was ban those telecom providers from providing internet service, right? But there's still ADSL internet that works. However, that is not accessible to the vast majority of people who can access internet in the first place. That is mainly for government organizations, for businesses, these kinds of things. Like, people don't usually have ADSL in their homes because it's just way too expensive. So the word is getting out through people using their work internet to send videos, to send other information, right, to activists outside of the country, on Twitter, Facebook, whatever. But also, people are using foreign SIM cards, like SIM cards from the UAE or from KSA, from Saudi Arabia, ironically, to use roaming internet so that they can, also have contact with the outside world. They're using SMS. So for people, for example, in the Middle East, they can send text messages. I don't think we can send text messages to Sudan, but people in the Middle East, for example, or other parts of the world, can send text messages to Sudan, and Sudanese people can send text messages to them. So that's how they're getting the word out. And internally, inside the country, they are communicating through SMS. So there'll be bulk SMS messages go out that will tell people about protests, that will tell people about what the plan is, what's going on, the current political climate, all of that. So people are trying to find ways around that. In terms of what's going to happen, how are we going to, what ways can the internet be restored? Unfortunately, it can't be done. I mean, when the internet was first shut down, people were tweeting Google and tweeting Elon Musk, saying, please help the people of Sudan. But because of sanctions, even though, people like companies like Google have internet for disaster zones or whatever, they can't offer that service because of U.S. sanctions against Sudan. So we're pretty much by ourselves. If the government doesn't decide to turn back on the internet, then it's not happening. So that's why people are finding these other ways.
Okay, so that was the last formal question, but we're definitely sticking around to answer questions. But I know you guys probably want to get up, stretch your legs. Before you leave, we have a few things that we want everyone to do. Make sure that you, in the back, use the resist bot to, fill out the resist bot. Make sure you have an actionable item when you leave here. And just know that we have everyone's information. And the action here is, like I said earlier, is for everyone to show up and actually, mobilize and organize in outside spaces. So this is just the beginning. This is the teach in, just so you guys have the background. So when you are protesting with us, you know what you're protesting about. You know what you're saying. Because, and it doesn't become this Save Africa mentality that, it's spreading all over social media. Like, this isn't a Save Africa thing, And these are real people. These are people that This is family. This is community. So we want you guys to be a part of our community now. So when we're on the streets protesting, you're there protesting with us. So I just want to say thank you for everyone for coming out, for sitting, for talking, for having a discourse with us. Please follow on social media credible sources that are giving good information, real information. Sarah Hassan, VS on Blast. Yusra Baja, another one of our sisters who's doing God's work. Really follow her. And yeah, just stay connected. We have all your information. We are going to be sending action items via email. We're going to send out resources that you guys, the GoFundMes that are real, things to stay away from. One of our cousins in New York put together this master document with everything that you can do. We'll share that as well. So we're just going to be exchanging resources and just fighting this fight. So I want to say thank you once again to everyone, and I think Ahmed Bass is going to come up here and give us a song.